So hi, we have Professor Andrew Martin from University of Sydney. Professor Martin is a professorial research fellow and Australian Research Council Future Fellow here at the University of Sydney currently, specializing in motivation, engagement, achievement and quantitative methods. Also an honorary senior research fellow in the Department of Education, University of Oxford, and President-elect International Association of Applied Psychology, Division 5 Education, Instructional and School Psychology. Thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Martin. Professor Martin, what is missing today in the education system?
I wonder if it's not so much what it's missing, but what it can do better, and what it can emphasise and de-emphasise. So I guess I think it can do things better along the lines of social and emotional well-being. So really understanding the nature of student motivation, student emotion, and its impacts on the learning process and achievement outcomes. I think including teacher-student relationships, that's another area that it could probably, it's not so much missing, but greater attention directed to that would enhance outcomes. I think another thing, greater attention to the strugglers in school. There tends to be school structures, school organisations, curriculum, timetables, a lot of the brain power in schools can sometimes be directed a little more at the high achievers as they're the flagship of the school, and that's what many schools are judged on, at the end of a year in terms of their Year 12 achievement and so on. But that can come at the expense of the strugglers, they're not ignored, but oftentimes I don't see as much proportional attention given to them. And I think a sign of a healthy school is one that attends appropriately to the full range. I think also in the area of instruction itself, I think there's greater attention to the realities of the cognitive architecture of the human mind as relevant to learning, and in particular the realities of working memory and long-term memory, and how to structure teaching around that. Things like explicit instruction and well-structured lessons, clear objectives, feedback, some drill and repetition, all of that is a little more consistent with the realities of the limits on working memory. So whereas there are many classrooms and schools that will emphasise more open-ended and ambiguous approaches, introducing discovery and exploratory learning too early in the process. They have a very valid and important role in the process, but it's introduced too early, leaving lots of kids at sea. So I think, and then finally I think in some ways the biggest challenge over the next decade I think will be how to meaningfully and effectively integrate technology in the classroom. There's a lot of learning. We're still on training wheels when it comes to laptops, tablets, iPads and things like that. There's a lot of learning to happen at the moment. We're getting a lot of things right, but also getting a few things wrong in that respect.
Sure. And what about the style of learning? Like some students are more visual, some auditory. Does the teaching style need to kind of cover all modes of learning so that it caters for all the different students?
Yeah. Look, I think good pedagogy covers the range of inputs and sensory inputs, if you like, and so there's there's appropriate visual representation. The verbal delivery of lessons, is such that kids can hear it properly. There's sufficient opportunities, particularly in the younger grades, with hands-on practical activities. Again, however, it's important to manage those very effectively and not overload students. Dare I say, to students' working memory, and so we're learning a lot about how to integrate visual and auditory, when to present a graph and when to present text only. And so because presenting it, there's an area of cognitive psychology, cognitive load theory, that if you present material in a way that it overloads the working memory, then the learning opportunity is lost. And so it is important to deliver instruction in a way that traverses all aspects and dimensions of how kids learn. But even that, the careful thought and appropriate delivery needs to be put into it, so that kids aren't overloaded, and also so that a straight line is run through the lesson, so that you're not jumping from one to the other, where students will get off track or get lost along the way.
And in terms of us educators, obviously, there's a school system, but then also at the university. What could us academics do to help students, university students, be more engaged and improve their productivity as well as well-being, because they're kind of interrelated?
Yeah, and in some ways it's a little more difficult in the university or post-school education sector. So the same in technical training institutions as well. There's not as much opportunity to develop relationships with the students, and we know that good teacher-student relationships are an important foundation of A, motivation, and B, achievement. There are also challenges for higher ed sectors. Many lessons tend to be in large classes and so on. Also, even things like attendance, there's sporadic attendance by students. University educators are not trained or don't engage in much professional development around effective pedagogy, so you've got a variable quality there. And also there's a big reliance on us university educators on the capacity for students to self-regulate and motivate themselves. It's very hands-off compared to school. So there's a big reliance on students getting their act together, and we make a lot of assumptions about all of that. And then on top of that, we have, at their stage in life, they're starting to hit, early adult challenges and issues, ranging from, relationship issues through to mental health issues. They'll really start coming into the frame, alcohol and other drugs. And even many of them getting to an age where their own parents are aging and things like that. So there's a whole personal world that school students in many ways are protected from, because just by their age and their developmental stage. Uni students, particularly postgraduate students, will hit these issues.
Yes.
And so they'll need to juggle those as well. So in some ways I haven't answered your question. I've more just raise the various challenges that I guess if we are to enhance the productivity or maintain the motivation engagement of higher ed or post-school education students, these are all factors that need, it's no easy matter.
Sure.
And these are all factors that will need attention.
So in order to, as you said, so there is a difference, and I remember from when I was in school, it was very routine. You just go to school, come back, do your homework, and then have dinner, and then do more homework, and so on. Whereas in university, as you mentioned, it's like I face a lot more challenges, like ranging from relationships. I'm trying to juggle my job and university work and everything. So, does that require university lecturers to be more empathic or more understanding that yes, the students are going through a lot of challenges. So, you know, the reason that they may not be engaged could be something outside the university. Maybe it's not the difficulty of the subject, but it's something that's bothering them personally. So maybe there needs to be a mechanism in place where they're directed to the right places so that they can get that support. Now, from memory, when I was in university, I wasn't aware that there is support out there in the university that can help me with relationship issues and stress and things like that. You know, there are workshops, there are, you know, one-on-one counseling services. And a lot of academics are not aware of them either. So, I mean, I only became aware of this just a few weeks ago, and I made contact with the student support services. So, perhaps maybe a program for academics to become aware that these services are available and somehow communicate that to their students, or have an induction where these are introduced. Would that, do you think?
Yes, I agree. For all educators, it's important to understand that they're human beings first, and students, enrolled students, second, if you like, or third or fourth. And so, where those core human needs are not being met, or if they're disrupted in any way, learning is going to be markedly affected. And so, yes, so I think if university educators can be provided on a regular basis with contact names and so on, just an email that might come once a semester about student services, student counselling services. I mean, other difficulties could be financial difficulties and things like that. And so, so I think it's important. You know, I think there's a place for the university administration to be on the front foot and send a nice, clear, standard email every semester with contact names and addresses, and, you know, what areas of they may specialise in, some examples of what, you know, they might refer students to this service to. I think there's also, so that's the personal side of things. I think it's also important for higher education educators to be very mindful of what a massive transition it is from the very structured and scaffolded nature of school, the school system, and I think there's too often the assumption, well, now that the university they've got to learn how to be, you know, self-directed and self-motivated and so on, and certainly that's important as the end game. But human beings don't make such abrupt changes easily. We tend to segue from one to the other in a fairly gradual way, and so I think, you know, first year universities should certainly be seen as part of that transition, you know, to this very self-directed and self-responsible learner that will start kicking in second, third, and fourth year. But first year's a big ask for that to be happening in totality. So I do think higher education educators, certainly in first year, you know, being a little more structured and explicit, providing templates, worked examples of essays, seeing that first year as a transition to that self-responsible learner. Because I think the opportunity cost, there is a big attrition in first year university, across all universities. What's the opportunity, and some of these kids never come back, what's the opportunity cost to society of these losses? And so, not to mention the personal opportunity cost that many of these students were perfectly capable of getting a degree, but that first year experience was so difficult, and so I think seeing that first year a little more as a transition year from school to higher ed, I think would also help from the personal perspective, but also academically as well. And indeed, some of our research looking at the effects of having a gap year, we've conducted 2 published studies now, and we found in both those students. Both those studies that students who had had a gap year you were more motivated when they returned to university, and also achieved more highly when they returned to university. And so so clearly that first year out is an important one for a number of reasons. Indeed, we've found that how that year is conducted affects their subsequent passage through university.
Now, that's a really good point, because I feel a lot of the students, especially students that come to University of Sydney and some of the top universities, they work so hard towards the end of high school to the point of burnout. And when they enter university, they probably are not as motivated, because they felt that they worked so hard, so they just need a break. But generally, that's what happens. You finish high school, you have a little break, and then you start university. So does that mean that the first year needs to be just a bit more gentle in terms of the content, the amount of workload, the difficulty? Would that kind of help students transition a little bit easier?
Yeah, and it's important to, because we don't want to lower the bar, but at the same time, we don't want it so challenging that we lose people we shouldn't. And so I think I think in many ways, for example, workloads can be reasonably similar, but the type of work I think could be adjusted so that it is more supported work. It is a year where we see it's important for students to find their feet. In the school system, we treat such transitions appropriately. So, for example, kindergarten or reception or prep, whatever state you happen to be in Australia, is the year where you just, you learn what this place is about, you're developing social skills, you get a broad idea about what needs to happen and so on, and then things are escalated a little more in year 1. Year 7, or whatever the first year of high school is the same. Schools are seeing that as a transition, and the effective schools tend to be the ones that get that transition right, where they see year 7 as the nexus between year 6 and year 8. And so, first year uni could be seen a little along those lines. Again, I think the bulk of course material can be got through, because you don't want, the case where you then have to add another year because you've made first year so thin. But so I think it's a matter of the types of assessments and the way material is presented and so on that can make the difference. We find in school, for example, students, students who previously were struggling on difficult subject matter, when it's presented in a different way, a high quality way, they're perfectly up to the job. And so the bar isn't lowered, it's just the nature of the tasks are restructured. The support is and the scaffolds and the templates and the work examples are provided, so there's not so much of a mystery about what's needed, and kids get into it. So I think first year could be similar.
Exactly. And the other thing that I've been working with the student support services is a program that we're kind of at the moment aiming at just for the project management students, and to see how it will go in terms of would it enhance the productivity, the well-being of the students, and help them transition a bit better. So this one basically goes for 4 weeks, for the first 4 weeks of the semester. So, and it's scheduled into the timetable for the students, so they know that they have to go to this class. And basically, from our discussion, we have a kind of a program. This is a draft; it may change, but the idea is it's called the Psychology of Success for engineering students and engineering and project management students. So lunch and learn. So basically, we go through career, why they're here, what they want to do in the future, creating personal success, which looks at self-control, goal setting, peak performance, maintaining success, so dealing with feedback, motivation, positive emotions, concentration, self-talk in high-performance context, and issues in high-performance context, and then finally, successful living, so which is making meaning and choices. So it's kind of going through a series of soft skills, personal skills, that they start looking at right from the beginning, so they create some good habits to help them transition more effectively. Do you think that might be a kind of a good way to go about introducing students to these kind of certain personal skills?
Yeah, yes, I do, because the sorts of constructs and the sorts of factors that you're mentioning, goal setting, control, meaning, relevance, these are all factors that are core to motivation, core to academic engagement, and we find again and again that these factors are relevant to student learning and student achievement. I think also it also sends a signal to the instructors, to the lecturers, to the teaching staff. We find in schools, for example, which is my main area of research, and teachers that say, look, I'm a chemistry teacher. I teach chemistry, relationships and how they're feeling and what's going on at home. That's not my business. I was trained in chemistry. I teach that. I know it. I teach that well. Whereas other teachers that say, look, yeah, I'm a chemistry teacher, but I also see that how this kid's feeling is relevant to my capacity to get the periodic table across to him and or her. The extent to which my students will be receptive to anything I say or do will depend on me recognising there are other dimensions in their lives that they walk into this classroom with. Those teachers tend to get the better outcomes, motivationally, but also in terms of chemistry or modern history. So these sorts of programs, when planted in an academic curriculum in university, send a signal, and that it's not just structural engineering, or chemical engineering or neuroscience, or history and philosophy and psychology that you're teaching, but there's also other dimensions to this. So I think both for the student directly, but for the institution and educators indirectly, this sends a signal as to what's important.
Right, sure. And going back to your last point, do you think it's worth having a workshop for academics, for educators, to actually how to motivate students more effectively, how to engage students more effectively? Because a lot of academics just don't know these about motivation, student motivation, and things like that. So would that actually help us?
In an ideal world, yes, and indeed schools will throw entire days or years of professional development at these very issues, because I guess because they're tethered to the students more closely, and they're answerable to parents and so on, they've learnt that they have to. Whereas in higher education, things are a little more removed. Whatever that student's problems are, I won't be accountable for them. The parents, I'm not answerable to the parents, and all that sort of stuff. So I think so professional development opportunities that are possible within higher education along these lines certainly are in step with what we're finding is effective educationally in other education systems. How that would be done, and being mindful of the workloads that academics are under, that would require negotiation to a point of certainly satisfaction on the side of the academics, because if it's not positioned in a way that's accommodating or respectful of the academics' life, they'll turn up, but they won't engage.
Exactly.
So it's very important that it's structured and built in a way that's acceptable, so that educators are receptive to the ideas and not seeing it as a further onus and burden or inconvenience.
Exactly. And there is a fine line, isn't there, between really supporting students so much that they don't actually develop their own kind of independence and letting them loose and just let them do whatever they want and learn from it. So this idea of helping them develop resilience, so be able to deal with their problems more effectively, but not to a degree where they fall into depression and not be able to be engaged at university in their academia and having lowered well-being. So and that fine line is a very difficult thing to find. How much support do students need, and how much do we just let them just go and experience life and see how life is a challenge, and you need to develop those resilience and skills to deal with it. Any comment on that, how we can kind of find that?
It is a fine line, and I think there's a gradual release of support, as students become what we might refer to as expert learners. But it's important to know that, from first year through to fifth year or sixth year, at any given point in subject matter, the students are usually novices. They're hitting stuff for the first time. And so we know that when you're in a novice position, certain amounts and types of support and structure and clarity is needed to develop expertise. And so realistically, I think what we do know again about the cognitive architecture of the human mind as relevant to learning, at many points along the process, students will be novices again and again, and certain supports are needed. However, after a while, we find that if we're sort of put in hard in the early years, if you like, they move from novice to expert faster and faster. And once they're moving into expertise, the training wheels come off, and they're sent to do their independent learning accordingly. So whereas you might not release them too early in first year, in second year you are releasing them a bit early because they're developing the skills and the repertoire to work to expertise faster, and again in third and fourth year. So I think that fine line is adjusted as they move through, but never forgetting that they're often novices at any point in the process, and so. But even in the workplace, they will be that, and employers would be mad to just let them fumble around in a pig's muddle